guys, my name is Amaka and this is Lizama Stitches. If you're yet to subscribe to this channel, please click on the subscribe button and subscribe, and also turn on the notification bell so that whenever I upload new videos, you'll be notified. In this tutorial, we're going to be learning how to make a tube top with straps. So let's get started. Now I've drawn some lines already. Now this is my starting point, which is also going to serve as my shoulder line. Now this is my shoulder measurement. Half of my shoulder measurement is 7 inches. So what I have here is 7.5 inches. That is plus half inch seam allowance. Now from this point, I came down here by 1 inch. I came down by 1 inch for my shoulder slant, which I connected to the neckline. Now this is my neckline. I have 3 inches. Now the neck width is 3 inches and the neck depth is 3 inches. Now this is my armhole curve. This is my chest point. This is my bust point. This is my under bust point. This is my waist point, and this is my seam allowance. Now I'm going to impute my dart. Now for me to do that, I'll need my bust span measurement. Now my bust span measurement is 8 inches. 8 divided by 2 gives you 4 inches, plus half inch, which I'm going to use to join it because I'm going to cut it, gives you 4.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 4.5 inches here. And here. And I'll connect it. Now let me label these lines. This is my chest point. This is my bust point. This is my under bust point. This is my waist point. And this is my seam allowance. I'm going to find the midpoint of this line. I'll find the midpoint of this line. So this is the midpoint of this line, and I'm going to connect this point to this point. So the next thing I'm going to do is this. I'm going to impute my dart. Now my dart, I'm going to be using 2 inches for my dart. I'll be using 2 inches for my dart. Now I'm going to distribute. This is how I'll distribute my 2 inches. Now on the waist point, I'm going to mark 1.5 inches here and half inch here. 1.5 inches and half inch. I'll do the same thing on the seam allowance. 1.5 and half inch. Now on the under bust point, I'm going to do the same thing. I'll use the same measurement, 1.5 and half inch. Now on the bust point, I'm going to go up by half inch and mark. And I'll come down on this bust point, I'll come down by half inch. Okay, so I'm going to connect these points together. So I'll connect this one with a straight line. And I'll connect this. I'm going to use my curved ruler. Now here, this is how I'll do it. I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to connect this point to this point. So the next thing I'm going to do now, I'm going to find the radius, my bust radius. Now for me to find my bust radius, I'm going to find the distance between the bust point and the under bust point. Now the distance between my bust point and my under bust point is 3.5 inches. Now I'm going to rotate that 3.5 inches just like this. So this is my bust radius. Because I don't want mine, I'll come up by 1 inch. Now you can either come up by 1 inch if you want your bust to cover more than this. You can go up by either ½ inch or 1 inch, depending on how you want, you want your bust to cover. So I'm going to go up by 1 inch. I'm going to go up by 1 inch. But if you want to, so now if you want to use this line, all you need to do is just to curve this, connect this to your chest point. You see, you just do something like this and connect it to your chest point. But if you want to go upward just like this, you just connect it, to your chest point. You see, just like this. Now after that, you connect this one. Now if you want to use this, if you want yours to be sweetheart neckline, all you need to do is to come down, and you curve it to this point. But if you don't want it to be sweetheart neckline, you can still curve it this way, whichever way you want the front to be. If you want it to be straight to cover, you want it to go low. Now I'm going to, from here, I'll go up by 1.5 inches because I don't want it to be too low. So I'm going to connect this point to this point. So this is the one I'll be using. But you can also decide to use this. You can decide to use this and curve it to this point. It all depends on what you want. But I'm using this. This is how I want mine to be. The next thing I'm going to do, now I'm going to impute my dart. Now the 2 inches, because I removed 2 inches from here, I'm using 2 inches for my dart. I'm also going to use 2 inches here. So I'm going to mark 1 inch on this point and 1 inch here. So I'll connect this point to this point and this point to this point. So I'm going to blend it so that I don't have any sharp edges. So the next thing I'm going to do is to take my horizontal measurements. Now I'm going to start with the waist. My waist circumference is 32 inches. 32 divided by 4 gives you 8 inches. That gives you 8 inches. Plus these 2 inches. Now these 2 inches I'm going to cut off from here. I'll be returning it here. If you don't return it here, you're going to have shortage. So I'm going to, now 8 plus 2 gives you 10 inches. Plus the 1 inch, which I'm going to use to join it together, I'm going to sew it together, gives you 11 inches. Gives you 11 inches. I'm going to mark the same thing here. 11 inches. Now, on the underbust point, my underbust circumference is 30 inches. 30 divided by 4 gives you 7.5 inches. So this 7.5 inches plus these 2 inches that which I'm going to cut off gives you 9.5 inches plus 1 inch which I'm going to use to join it together gives you 10.5 inches. 10.5 inches. So now the next thing I'm going to do is to take my, now I'm going to take my bust measurement. I'm going to take my bust measurement on my chest point. Now my bust circumference is 38 inches. 38 divided by 4 gives you 9.5 inches. Plus these 2 inches which I'm going to cut off here, these 2 inches for that, which I'm going to cut off, gives you 11.5 inches. Plus 1 inch, which I'm going to use to join it together, gives you 12.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 12.5 inches here. I'm going to connect this point to this point. I'm going to connect this point to this point and this point to this point. Now I'm going to add my seam allowance. I usually add my seam allowance on my pattern paper, so once I place it on my fabric, I'll just cut it. It makes my work easy, but it's optional. You can decide to add on your fabric and not on your pattern paper, but I'm adding mine on my pattern paper. So I'm working with 1.5 inches seam allowance. So I'll connect it. Now I'm through with the front. I'm going to cut it. So this is the front. This is the front. So I'm going to keep it aside and work on the back. So this is my back panel. Now here I have, now this is my shoulder line, and I came down by 1 inch for my shoulder slant. I have 3 inches neck width here and 1 inch neck depth. And this is my armhole curve. This is my chest point. This is my waist point, and this is my seam allowance. So the next thing I'm going to do now this is my zipper allowance. This is my zipper. So now every measurement I'm taking, I'm going to take it from here. I'll take it from this line away from the zipper allowance. So now the first thing I'm going to do is to impute my dart line. Now for me to do that, I'll be working with my nipple to my bust. For me to do that, I'll be working with my bust span measurement. And my bust span measurement is 8 inches. 8 divided by 2 gives you 4 inches plus ½ inch, which I'm going to use to join it because I'm going to cut this open. That gives you 4.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 4.5 inches here and here. And I'll connect it. Now after that, I'm going to mark, now I'm here for the back, I'm taking away 1 inch for my dart. So I'm going to mark ½ inch in between this line. Now I'm going to mark ½ inch here and ½ inch here. I'll do the same thing on the seam allowance, ½ inch here and ½ inch here. Now from the chest point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch. I'll come down by 1 inch. And I'll connect this point to this point, this point to this point. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to eliminate the zipper bulge. Now from here, from this zipper allowance, I'm going to come in by 3/4 inch. You can use half inch, you can use 1 inch, but I'm using 3/4 inch. So I'm going to mark 3/4 inch here. And I'll connect this point to, I'm going to connect it this way. Now this is no longer useful to me, so I'm going to create a new zipper allowance. Now from this line, I'm going to mark 3/4 inch, and I'll connect this point to this point. So now I have a new zipper allowance. So the next thing I'm going to do is to take my horizontal measurement. I'm going to take my horizontal measurement. Now my waist circumference is 32 inches. 32 divided by 4 gives you 8 inches. 8 inches plus this 1 inch seam, for this 1 inch for that, which I'm going to cut off, I'm going to return it here. So plus this 1 inch for that gives you 9 inches. Plus 1 inch, which I'm going to use to join this together, because I told you that I'm going to cut it open, gives you 10 inches. So I'm going to mark 10 inches here from this line. Now see, from this line, I'm going to mark 10 inches. Now on the chest point, I'm going to take my bust circumference on the chest point. My bust circumference is 38 inches. 38 divided by 4 gives you 9.5 inches. Plus 1 inch, which I'm going to use to join these two together, gives you 10.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 10.5 inches here. And I'll connect it. So the next thing I'll do is to add my seam allowance. My seam allowance is, I'm using 1.5 inches seam allowance. So I'll connect it. Now for the back, you can decide to come down by 1 inch and curve your back. Curve your back, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to maintain this line. So I'm going to cut it. So I'm going to cut this. I'm going to cut off the dart. So this is the back. This is the back, and this is the front. This is the front. Now take note. While cutting, I'm going to cut this on fold. I'll cut this, one of these on fold. This, I'm going to cut 2 of these. This, I'm going to cut 2 of these and 2 of this. This is going to be on fold. 2 of this, 2 of this, and 2 of this. So I'll cut it and show you. Now I've brought back this our pattern paper. Now for us to determine the length of the straps, so that you don't just cut your straps. You don't just cut your straps anyhow, because if you do that, it's either the straps will be too long or too short. So for you to be able to get the actual measurements, now we'll have to work with this part of the pattern paper. Now here, if you're using the midpoint of the shoulder line, which means now the length of the front panel is 5.5 inches. It's 5.5 inches. But if you're using this part of the shoulder line, which means you're going to cut like 6 inches. 6 inches. Your straps, the front panel is 6 inches, but I'll be using here, this is where I'll be working with. The front is going to be 5.5 inches. Now for the back panel, the back panel, now I'm going to find the midpoint. Now this is the midpoint. Now from that midpoint, so from the midpoint, I'm going to, now what I have here is 8.5 inches. You can also use this part. But I want to use this part. I want to take my measurement from this part, from the midpoint of the shoulder. Now what I have here is 8.5 inches. So 8.5 inches plus 5.5 inches, that gives you 14 inches. So I'm going to add 1 inch for seam allowance, and what that gives you 15 inches. So the straps I'm going to cut out is going to be 15 inches. Now I've cut out my fabrics. Now this is the center front. This is the center front. Now here I have the lining and the main fabric. Now when I was drafting, I forgot to add my seam allowance here. I forgot to add my seam allowance here, so I had to add it on the fabric. So while drafting, it's either you should either add your seam allowance on your pattern paper, or you can also add on your fabric. So this is my seam allowance. Don't forget to add your seam allowance. Now I've cut out the lining and the main fabric, and I've also cut out the straps. Now these are the straps. Now this is how I'm going to join it. Now, okay, for the straps, this is 16 inches and this is 4 inches. Now 4 inches, when I put it on fold, I'm going to have 2 inches. I'll sew with ½ inch and I'll be left with 1.5 inches. So at the end of the day, my straps is going to be 1.5 inches. So that is it with the straps. Now for this, let me show you how to join this. Now I'm going to take this to my sewing machine. And now this is the center front. This is the center front. So this is how I'm going to sew it. I'm going to place this way and I'll sew it. I'll sew from here. I'll join it and sew. When I sew it, I'll turn it this way, and I'll do the same thing here. For this one, I'm going to place it this way and I'll sew. I'll start from the lower part and I'll sew to the upper part and I'll turn it this way. So that's for the center front. That's how I'll join the center front. For the back, now for the back, I'm going to bring this. Now this is the side seam. Now I'm going to bring these two and I'll join these two together. This is my dart. So I'll place it this way and I'll sew. I'll sew it and I'll turn it. I'll do the same thing here. So I'm going to do that and I'll show you. After that, I'll show you how the next thing to do. And I'm going to iron interfacing on my main fabric and on the lining. So I'll do it and show you the outcome. So now I've joined all of them together. Now this is it, and this is what I did. I had to iron interfacing on my main fabric and on the lining, and after that I notched the center. I notched and ironed it. I've ironed it very well. I used my tailor's hand to iron this one, the front panel, because of the bustier. Now the next thing I'm going to do now these are the straps. After sewing, I had to iron it. Now the wrong side, this part, I faced it inside. Now this is going to be on the wrong side, while this is going to be on the right side. This is going to be outside. Now this is how to fix your straps how to attach your straps to the bodice. I'm going to illustrate with pin. So now this is it. This wrong side is going to be facing the lining. It's going to be facing the lining just like this, while this right side is going to be facing the main fabric. Now I placed the lining and the main fabric, right side facing right side. Now I'm going to illustrate with pin. So when I take this to my sewing machine, I'm going to sew it. I'm going to sew it this way. I'll sew it this way, sew it this way to this point. That is after I must have attached this part of this one. Now let me illustrate with pin. So after sewing it this way, I'm going to turn it. And when I turn it, you see, now this right side is facing the main fabric, is facing the right side, while this one is facing the lining. So now after sewing it that way, this way, I'm going to turn it this way. Now this is for this. This is for this. So I'm going to place this. Make sure that this part is on the main fabric. And I'll now place this one on top. And I'll sew. I'm going to sew it this way. Let me illustrate with pin. So now after sewing, I'm going to notch. After notching, I'll push the seam allowance on the lining and top stitch. Then after that, I'm going to turn it this way. You see? You see? Now this is the zipper allowance. So this is what I'm going to have after sewing. So the same way I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this part. So I'll do it and show you the outcome. Now this is it. This is the front panel and this is the back. This is the back panel. This is the zipper allowance and this is the side. Okay. Now the next thing I'm going to do, okay, now this is what I did. After joining it, after sewing it, I notched. After notching, I pushed the seam allowance on the lining and top stitched. So I did the same thing here as well. So now this is how I'm going to join it. Okay, so this is the wrong side. This is the wrong side. So this is how I'm going to join it. So now this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to open it this way and open this way. Now I'm going to hold it lining to lining and main fabric to main fabric. So I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew it with the allowance I left. I'll sew it with the allowance I left. And I'm also going to sew this one. Sew it with the allowance I left. I'll also sew the zipper. I'm going to turn the zipper this way and sew it with 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I'll sew it with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then I'll show you the outcome. Now this is the outcome of my top. Now this is a gown. This is the outcome. I've joined the sides. You see? So this is how it is. You see? Now from here you're not seeing the seam allowance. You see how inside is very neat. The inside is neat, outside is neat. Okay, so now this is it. So that's just it with this tutorial. So I'm going to continue with my gown. It's a flay gown. So after now, I'm going to continue with my gown. And when I attach the lower part, then I'm going to fix the zipper. So that's just it with this tutorial. I actually did a tutorial on how to make a tube top. So along the line, I felt I should also teach you how to attach straps to your tube top. So that was how I came up with this tutorial. Now, if you've not seen that video, I'm going to leave the link of that video in the description box below. So if you found this tutorial helpful, please click on the like button. When you like this video, YouTube upgrading will show it to more people. And when you do that, it's a way of supporting a sister. And also subscribe to my channel to support me. Subscription is free. Feel free to follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Lizama Stitches. We've come to the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching. See you in my next video. Bye.